James is having Goldfish Greek Salad and some jambalaya with shiitakes and stuff. He's going to talk about Inside the Soviet Alternative Universe and a kid's book. And I'm going to cut up some watermelon. That's all I'm going to have for dinner because that's all I feel like having. And I'm going to cut some oregano for on James's salad. So it's all James today.
Okay, so spoiler alert, I haven't finished this book up, but I've finished the stories up, and then it's meant for instruction in schools, it looks like. So there are a lot of questions and activities and stuff like that in the end. So I haven't quite finished that. It looks like about 3/4 of it are stories, and then there are various sorts of activities and questions and stuff like that. I guess I still got maybe 10 pages of 100, almost 200 pages. But I've read the stories, and that's what they're about. This is about. I can't see using this. This was republished in 1988. I don't know. I don't think it had actually these activities and questions and stuff like that in the original edition. So these are presumably something like kids' classics. The Petit Nicolas series. It's other characters too. Joachim, maybe is how they'd say it. Joachim is one of his friends. So I'm not exactly sure. One of the titles features Joachim, and but the ones that I've run across have featured Le Petit Nicolas, the little Nicholas. And here it's les copains. And the funny thing about French is sometimes when you say les copains, it means his friends. And the friends. Little Nicholas and his friend, and the friends. I think it basically means his friends. There's a rugby scrum here. And I don't know if this is, they all look pretty well the same the way they're drawn. Except for there's one guy, Alceste maybe, who's always chowing down on food. And the food already, though he's a kid, maybe in grade 5 or something like that, is already going to his gut. So he's one guy. And then there's one kid with glasses, and he's the teacher's shoo-shoo, which I think means pet, the teacher's pet, because he actually knows everything, and he's not a nice guy, according to his not so much friends, but classmates, stuff like that. And you know, like I don't know. I was kind of more like Agnon, is his name, than the rest of these guys. They're always looking for some sort of excuse to have a brawl, and it seems like almost every chapter is a story, has a brawl. The kids, their friends are copains, and they have a brawl. I can't remember grade 5 and 6 ever having a brawl. Maybe it's a little bit different in France. I'm sure hope not. Anyway, one of these guys, I think the guy wrote as it were, the script or whatever, the story, contributed to Mad Magazine of all things. Son Pay. He's contributed to Paris Match. Let's see, the other guy, the guy who does the artwork. Okay. Oh no, Son Pay did the artwork. And yeah, So Goscinny, what is that, a Romanian name or something like that? He worked with Mad Magazine. He also created, it says here, Asterix. Is that how they say it? Asterix? You never run across that. And Lucky Luke. I actually I never heard of Lucky Luke until I ran across it in a book sale at the library here in Lethbridge. And it was actually given up by someone I used to know at university who was a French major, actually. Wanted to be a lawyer or something like that. Anyway, the artwork just isn't that good. It's cartoonish, but you can't tell the difference between the kids. You know? There's Oid and Nicolas and what are some of the other names? I mean, they're just names. They're not really characters. Clotaire and what are some of the other ones? There's and like, why would you have this? Instructing kids. There's one character that's in a couple of stories. Marie Edwige, is it Edwige or something like that? It'd be Hedwig, made up in French. Edwige, probably. Marie Edwige. And she's supposed to be pretty, and maybe Petit Nicolas has a little bit of a crush on her. So there's Alceste. Is he the fatty? I can't remember. And there's Joachim Mex, or Mexin. I'm not sure how you... Tara mentioned that already. Boyd mentioned Geoffroy. Jeffrey. And there's only one. There are some girls mentioned in one chapter. There's a girls' party where Petit Nicolas Pauvre, and Nicolas is the only boy invited, and he looks really sad because all the girls are having a hen party or something like that, and he's off in a corner, and he's dreaming. In the one picture, he's dreaming about playing soccer in the mud or something like that. It shows the guys going to a bookstore and threatening to make a mess. I certainly wasn't that way when I was a kid. No use for kids that are going to threatening to make a mess in a bookstore, a library, anything like that. He kind of looks sad there, off by himself in a corner. There he is. He's dreaming about playing soccer. Yeah, soccer's a round ball. He's Mary Hedwig. It's her birthday party. So, like if you're using this to instruct kids, there's just not enough representation for girls. How do you expect girls to be interested in this kind of stuff? So, anyway, it's definitely not recommended for school, and I don't know. I mean, it kind of gives me a feeling of maybe being able to command the French, but it's supposed to be, I think, for grades 5 and 6. It's not much of an achievement, but got it done. And, okay, inside the Soviet alternate universe, and I think this is supposed to be a bullet hole through glass or something like that. Cover. So the Cold War's end and the Soviet Union's fall reappraised. So this guy gets some things relatively right. He worked with former U.S. Senator Sam Nunn. I think came from the Democrat side of things. William Taubman gives a recommend here. Taubman wrote, I think, what's supposed to be almost like nowadays the definitive biography of Nikita Khrushchev. I think he's probably, let's see what the university is, Amherst College. He probably mispronounced his name Taubman or something like that, but it really should be Taubman, and it means deaf man actually in German, or dove man, but Taub, I think it's Tauba actually, it means dove in German, and Taub means deaf. It's probably cognate with the English word deaf. In other words, one point in time, way, way back when, they were the same word. It's not to say it was either one or the other, but a word similar to taub and deaf. Maybe you can hear the relationship. Many people would have trouble with it. Same thing with dove and tauba. That sounds the same to me, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they're very closely related. English, in case you didn't realize it is a Germanic language, and the English folks came over from Germany, Lower Germany, and neighboring parts, like some of them came over from Denmark, mainland of Denmark, and some came from the area between Denmark and Germany, and some might have come from Holland, the Frisians. So they came over, the Anglo-Saxons. Saxons came from Germany, basically. The Angles came from the area between Denmark and Germany, and the Jutes that came over, we should pronounce that Utes, or Juts, and that would be Jutland, and the Danish people now call it Jylland, something like that. And that's basically just the mainland of Denmark. The English people are Scandinavian, Frisian, German type of mix, but those are all Germanic languages. Maybe a few other things mixed in there. But yeah, this guy takes exception to people saying that Ronald Reagan won the Cold War all on his lonesome. And he didn't. We've talked about this before. He didn't. And people who want to give him credit, or if he wanted to claim credit, he's seriously dead now. He's brain dead long before then, I'm afraid, before his official death. What the Americans contributed to the defeat of the Soviet Union was actually paid for by taxpayers, and not all paid for. They were borrowing heavily to amp up the American military, and I had no problem with it, or had no problem with that. But it was the rich people weren't paying for it then. So what they did was they borrowed on the backs of the descendants of the poor people back then, the poor working people, middle class people too. They're still paying it back. Sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters of the folks that were not of the rich folks back in the 80s in the United States. They're still paying it back. So it was done on the backs of the working poor. Ronald Reagan and his buddies didn't contribute much of anything to it. The other thing that drove the Soviet Union economically to the ground was the Saudis dumping oil on the market, and Russia now is a major producer of oil, exporter particularly, and it was back then. And about 85, 86, when the Saudis started dumping oil, they were fighting the war in Afghanistan. The Russians had no business being there, and they were fighting it using the economic means of dumping oil, running the Soviet finances into that hole. It worked very, very well. And of course, the idea is, Ronald Reagan somehow persuaded the Saudis to do that. Well, it's not as though the Saudis were doing it for a charity. They were probably more enthused about beating the Soviets in Afghanistan than the Americans were. And so they, it might have been cooked up by the Reagan administration, having the Saudis do it. I suspect the Saudis would have thought of it themselves, and they, they've got their problems and stuff like that, but I don't think of them as being supremely stupid or anything like that. They've got the oil. Why wouldn't they do it? It's not as though Reagan, pretty, please, can you do this so I can make my name and fame and history and stuff like that? Yeah. Now, understand, people in Saudi perhaps suffered somewhat because the oil prices went down and they were dumping oil in the market, so they, like they would have been selling more at lower prices. So maybe things came out. Apparently, citizens of Saudi Arabia don't do as well as they used to, but I think that's largely because of a huge population increase, producing about the same amount of oil, but the revenues from that have to be spread amongst more and more people. They've got a very irresponsible population growth rate in Saudi Arabia. Hopefully it's ameliorating somewhat, but it's ridiculous and stupid. For a long time they've been using oil to get the salt out of seawater to water. And eventually people will just say, well, we want your oil and you need water just to keep your people alive. How much are you willing to pay for it, fellas? And then they'll run out of oil, so they won't be able to desalinate water. Yeah. Well, yeah. Oil is a limited sort of resource. Anyway, this poor fella, yeah, he gets that right. But then he's got this, I just, a shiver ran through me from my toes all the way to the tips of my ears when I read him mention in an improving matter Clifford Geertz, or Geertz, or whatever his name is. I think he's American. Lord only knows how. Geertz is probably the way he mispronounces the name, or mispronounced. Maybe he's dead now. Maybe he died of embarrassment. But he's kind of like a sociologist slash anthropologist. I think he's more of an anthropologist. But, like the idea this guy gets from Geertz is, we've got to study our enemies so we can get inside their heads. And, it's really important to empathize. But then he criticizes FDR for not getting inside Stalin's head and thinking he was just a good old Uncle Joe, Joseph Stalin. Well, you'd better get inside the heads of your opponents, especially like if you've got are you trying to maintain something like a democracy. You better understand that Nazis are bad guys, and you better understand that commies are bad guys. They do not have any interest in democracy aside from overthrowing it. Now, this guy starts yipping and yapping about the war on terror and how Bush Baby Jr., George Bush Jr., I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of a Bush baby. You'll know what I'm joking about if you have. When I call Bush George, I almost called him the George Bush Jr. Bush baby. Got these frightened big eyes. I guess he's got small eyes, but kind of look frightened. It's kind of like stage fright. Well, like the whole world's watching. I don't know what to do. Where's Dick Cheney? I'd better pull Dick Cheney's chain, have him come out, get him out from the zoo there, and then I can consult with him because he belongs in the zoo, but he's smarter than I, George Bush, am. Come on, Dick, where are you? Anyway, so Rumsfeld, I think, there was this weird sort of thing. I call this imperial vice presidency, and it's been kind of like the Republican default setting since Eisenhower and Nixon, as imperial vice presidency. The vice president, like Dick Cheney or Richard Nixon, runs the show for an incompetent flubber like Dwight D. Eisenhower and George W. Bush. The sad thing is Cheney looked as though he was kind of beholden in some fashion or another to Donald Rumsfeld. And Rumsfeld had a silly idea of going into Iraq with a bare bones number of troopers and a lot of technology. Well, the Americans tried, like with more troops, but a lot of technology in Vietnam, and it didn't work out. Some of these idiots never ever learned, because Rumsfeld was around when Vietnam was happening. He wasn't in power during the beginning of that, but there you go. Anyway, Rumsfeld, what a stupid idiot. So yeah, these guys didn't understand. The big trouble is, like this guy, you got to get in their heads. You don't go around saying you're fighting a war on terror when you're really fighting a war, and it's not on Muslim fundamentalists. You're fighting a war against Muslim traditionalists. That's the vast majority of Muslims in the world. They might not have been doing terrorism, but there was huge support for Osama bin Laden. I think it was something like, across the Muslim world, something like 70% after 9/11. The biggest terrorist attack outside of a war, I think, in the history of the world. It's like 3,000, almost 3,000 people killed in less than a day. So this guy's saying, oh, they're getting it wrong because they're not getting in their heads. And you try to understand, yeah, you try to understand, and you'd better start understanding about Islam, how bad the average Muslim is in terms of his or her sympathy. You have got to understand, in Islam, there is no room for democracy. He's right, you've got to get inside their heads, but this guy hasn't. Now, he's talking about, the United States getting it wrong in the wake of the Cold War. So how good is he at predicting things and getting inside people's heads? This is published in 2008, and he's talking about their Russia basically being pretty malleable, easy to get along with in the future under Putin. And that's interesting. Let me just see. 271. Here he is as prophet, because he gets into people's heads, eh? Yeah. 271. Foreign Affairs under 269. Okay, on the other side of the coin, President Putin has demonstrated, I put those in scare quotes, or that demonstrated in scare quotes, that Russia has numerous ways to be helpful to the United States and the West in the struggle against global terrorism and proliferation of WMD, and in the resolution of other pressing international problems. Today's Russia, in short, requires our close attention. Well, like Russia in the 21st century has been the biggest terrorist of them all. State terror, but it's terrorism. And, he'd already done state terrorism before he even came to power in 1999 against the Chechens. Huh? Yeah, so what's this, like, we've got a lot to kind of, like, get from her? So, yeah, this guy doesn't understand Putin. He's got no clue. And he's an old Russian hand. He's, how many decades was he dealing with Russia or whatever? Yeah, it's stunning. He just seems to have no clue. At the practical level, Putin's Russia has delayed removal of its 2 military bases in Georgia. I believe in 2008, the year this was published, they started to do state terror in Georgia. Georgia was supposed to be an independent republic at that point in time. Okay. It continues to support repugnant regimes in Belarus and in the separatist enclaves of Transnistria in Moldova. So that's Moldova. It's kind of like Romanian speaking people, just southeast of the Ukraine. Ossetia and Abkhazia, both in Georgia. It blatantly interfered in Ukraine's presidential elections. Although when these efforts failed, Putin proclaimed a willingness to work cooperatively with newly elected Ukrainian President Yushchenko. Yeah, Yushchenko's the guy Putin tried to poison and ended up messing up his face badly with the poison. It might not have been intended to kill him, but yeah. So proclaimed a willingness to work cooperatively. Well, he proclaims all sorts of things. Wasn't he supposed to be looking for peace with the Ukraine? And now he's setting records for, daily drone attacks on Ukraine. Incidentally, Donald Trump was supposed to have had that war all wrapped up. Wasn't that one of his election promises? Or threats or whatever? I'll have that war wrapped up. Was it a month, he'd say? A couple of months of him taking office again? Stealing office? Okay, unbalanced, Russia's current assertions of influence, however unseemly and objectionable, it's worse than unseemly and objectionable, okay? Do not add up to an effort to recreate an empire even remotely comparable to that mandated and justified by the Soviet conception of government. You know, the Ukraine's a big freaking place. It's got as many people in it as Canada. It's somewhere around 40 million. However, Putin has revealed no inclination to push Russia's new borders outward toward their pre-1992 position by threat of or actual resort to military force. Yeah, he doesn't show these things. You got to read his mind, moron. That's the whole thing that you're boasting you're so good at and that people should do. So he just blew that. His whole thesis is shot here. In terms of him, like I'd never get him trying to get into other people's heads. He can't do it. He's an expert on Russia. He spent time there, lots of time there. And he's an actual CIA guy, but he's into Clifford Geertz. You guys who think CIA is all like right-wing and all this sort of stuff. Clifford